You're raised as an athlete to fight back. So why all of a sudden when you retire do you stop the good fight?
This is Finding Center with Nick Hardwick.
Hey all, it's Nick. If you follow my stories on Instagram, I'm at Nick Hardwick. Then you already know I'm very routined and regimented. I post almost every meal that I eat to show what health and maintaining a fit and active body and lifestyle, that it's not a trick. So if you're not following me, please follow me. It's consistently making good choices on a daily basis with what you put into your body and how you live and how much you move. One thing I put into my body since the company was founded in 2017 is BUBS Naturals, collagen protein, and MCT oil powder. One way or another, I have used BUBS religiously daily. Now, most mornings during the work week, I'm up and at 'em at about 4 a.m., having my pre-workout shake at 4:30. I count, as you know, all my macronutrients. I'm super specific about what I put in and at what times. And that meal specifically has 5 grams of fat, 40 grams of protein, 45 grams of carbs. Part of that drink, the tasty part anyway, is BUBS MCT oil powder. It adds such a nice little creaminess and it balances out the profile and it slows down the digestion of the protein and the carbs so I can have sustained energy at the gym at 5 a.m. And on the weekends, or really when I want to treat myself, I have either a BUBS protein latte or a matcha green tea protein. You can find those recipes on my stories. Add 20 grams of collagen protein, which I find very gentle on the stomach, and a little dose of MCT oil powder. Whip it up with the magic wand that they have, super cool, and voila, it's just a really decadent treat. I know my body. I listen very closely to how it responds to what I put in it. And I wouldn't have stuck with BUBS through the years if my body didn't like what it was feeling. Couple of other good things. No other collagen brand can claim to be 100% NSF certified for sport, which is the official seal of approval for most all professional sports. Not that you're a professional athlete. I get that. But you know that what you're getting is what is claimed on the package with that certification. That's huge for me because a lot of products, they just can't offer that. And they stand behind their products with a 100% guarantee. You're going to love the product. It's fabulous. So that's not all going to matter, but it could be for your first time a good peace of mind. Here's something else I love about the company. They always donate 10% of BUBS to charity. The Glenn Doherty Foundation, the namesake for BUBS. You'll read up on his story. You can check that out at bubsnaturals.com. If you happen to be in the San Diego area, BUBS products are now available at all Berenson marketplaces. Stop in, pick some up today, and see how conveniently health fits into your life. If you don't have a Berenson near you or you don't want to go to the store, order it online at bubsnaturals.com. Again, you'll find recipes and their blog is really fantastic. Use the code NICK15 for 15% off. That discount only works at bubsnaturals.com, or they are also on Amazon Prime and Amazon Choice. Check them out, guys. I swear by them, bubsnaturals.com. Joining us today on the Finding Center podcast, it's Alex Berenson. Alex is the author of Tell Your Children the Truth About Marijuana, Mental Illness, and Violence. Alex is an award-winning novelist and reporter that's covered topics such as the Iraq War, pharmaceutical and medical systems, as well as the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme for the New York Times. His first novel, The Faithful Spy, was released in April '06. He won an Edgar Award for the best first novel by an American author and went on to rise to the #1 spot on the New York Times bestseller list. He has since went on to complete 11 more novels in his John Wells series of books. Along with Tell Your Children, he has another nonfiction book called The Number. You can follow Alex on Twitter at Alex Berenson, that's Berenson, or on his website, alexberenson.com. I hope you guys enjoy. Alex, thank you so much for the time to discuss this important topic. Let's get right into this thing. You've had such a fantastic career writing the John Wells series of novels. Why was this an important enough topic for you to switch out of that mode and to tackle this really volatile subject?
You can really blame my wife, or thank my wife, as the case may be. She is a psychiatrist, a forensic psychiatrist, and that means she deals with the criminally mentally ill. And so she over a period of years, not just months, but years, was telling me about cases she'd seen where there had been, serious violence committed by people who had been using cannabis for a long time, or in some cases had only been using a little bit, but had a psychotic episode. A psychotic episode is what people would say going crazy. You have some kind of break from reality. You hear voices. Psychiatrists describe that as a psychotic episode. So honestly, I didn't really believe her. I was a reporter for the New York Times before I started becoming a novelist, and I didn't really have much of an opinion about cannabis or about legalization. And I sort of said to her, well, this sounds kind of like reefer madness to me. And she said, well, why don't you go look at the data? Eventually, she got tired of me mansplaining to her when I really didn't know anything about what I was talking about. And she'd seen the patients and done all the work. And I discovered, you know what? She's right. There is incredible scientific evidence that cannabis is linked to severe mental illness. I mean, I think we all know that it can cause apathy, the stoner in the basement who spends all his time playing video games. But the idea that it could actually be seriously causing mental problems for people, I think is something that the cannabis community has really successfully said is a joke. And unfortunately, it's not a joke at all. And so I decided I have to write this book for two reasons. First of all, I have to tell people what the science says because, look, scientists in general don't like getting involved in big public policy debates. I think a lot of them feel like our job is to produce the truth, and then what happens with it is up to everybody else. But the other thing is, as a journalist, I said to myself, this is crazy, and it's crazy that people don't know about this, and it's crazy that my profession, because I still consider myself a journalist, has failed so badly.
You want to talk about putting yourself right in the crosshairs of this whole topic. I mean, I guess your wife kind of threw you out in front of the crosshairs when she sent you on this scent. I applaud you for the courage to really put out the data, the science, and to speak out against it's an overwhelming landslide of people who are pro-marijuana proponents that seem to really just ignore the facts behind the harms of the drug. How do you feel?
It's really true.
It is true. I mean, everyone and that was the thing when you mentioned the violent behavior that could be associated with marijuana. I think that's one thing that's like, oh, they're harmless. And like you said, it's like sitting on the basement, apathetic, amotivational, and not going to hurt anybody. But the science tells a different story. Before we get into all of it, how do you feel like the book was received publicly?
So I think it's very interesting. As you say, I've gotten a lot of criticism from a lot of pro-cannabis people and people who think it should be legal for one reason or another, even if they don't use themselves. Bomani Jones, for example, has criticized me. I think there are a lot of people in the sports world who are very pro-cannabis, and obviously that's something we could talk about. But scientists, the people in the scientific community, have pretty strongly come out in favor of the book, including the thing that makes me happiest is that I've spoken before places like the Royal College of Surgeons of Ireland. That's a major medical school in Ireland. I've spoken before medical schools in places like Nebraska. I've spoken to lots of psychiatric organizations and psychiatrists because they see this issue and they're not sure what to do about it. And I think they feel good that somebody outside has given them a bit of a voice. Now, at the same time, I've definitely taken criticism from the cannabis, advocacy groups and from people who are making money selling this drug. They hate me. They hate the book. And to me, that shows me that I must have touched some kind of nerve.
Oh, absolutely. And I tell you, your book does a really amazing job of telling the history of really how we got to this point in time with marijuana. And it seemed like, correct me if I'm wrong, it all kind of started with the AIDS crisis and then the coining of the phrase medical marijuana really to prevent the wasting associated with that disease. Is it a misnomer, do you think, to still call it medical marijuana these days?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's really no such thing as medical marijuana. Now, obviously, some people who have pain or other conditions they may get temporary relief from using this drug. Using any intoxicant is going to make you feel better. And it's really interesting, actually, if you look at the history of cocaine, you see the same thing. In the 1880s, after cocaine really was synthesized from plants for the first time, doctors thought it was a cure-all. They thought, hey, I can give this to just about anybody and it'll cure them. it doesn't, unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. You don't actually cure anybody with cocaine. You just make them feel better for a little while until they get addicted and start to feel much worse. And that's more or less true with cannabis too. There's a handful of conditions, and the most notable is childhood epilepsy and CBD, which is, as I'm sure you know, but some people may not. CBD is a non-intoxicating chemical in cannabis, or one of the non-intoxicating chemicals. THC is the intoxicating chemical in cannabis. That's what people are using to get high. And there's some evidence that CBD might be valuable for kids with epilepsy, and it's actually been approved for that purpose by the Food and Drug Administration, and that's great. I think it's great that we have that treatment, but that is not why most people are using marijuana. They're using cannabis to get high. They're using THC to get high, and it has basically no impact on their underlying medical conditions, whatever those might be. And so, and I say this in the book, but what's happened is that the cannabis advocacy community knows that, Americans we're pretty fair people. And if you say to somebody, well, this could help somebody with breast cancer, this could help somebody with HIV, this could help somebody with epilepsy, most people don't have the time to go look at all the papers and see that's not really true. There's not really very good evidence for any of this stuff. So if you do a really, a smart ad campaign, you're in a place like California where people, tend to be, more liberal anyway. They're going to vote to approve this. And that's what's happened. And it really started in 1996 in California, and it's taken off from there.
Yeah, you'd mentioned it. The number one claim is for marijuana use is pain management, and not severe pain like a broken bone or anything like that, but the chronic daily pain. And I'll admit, I've been a user in the past. I proudly quit, though. It's just not in alignment with my health goals or who I want to be as a dad. And anecdotally, I can say from a pain management standpoint, it never helped alleviate any of the chronic symptoms that I felt from years of playing football. It was just really a chance to maybe escape from the stress, or it's kind of like having a cocktail at the end of the night or a glass of wine or something like that. But I'm not really a partway in type guy. I can't just use it as a glass of wine. It's like one day turns into 3 days, turns into 7 days a week, and it just doesn't work for me. But aside from that, I mean, science says, right, that it's not all that effective for pain management.
You're absolutely correct. And this is a really interesting point, because I think in sports, the number one sort of legitimate use, you would say, as well as in our culture, is for pain. Because, the idea is, well, we're in this terrible opioid crisis right now, which of course we are. Is there something that's not an opioid that might help people with pain? And there's been some studies, and the cannabis community has really jumped on these that suggested, well, if you legalize medical marijuana, you have fewer opioid overdoses. So unfortunately, that's not true. The study that gets cited all the time on this came out in 2014, and it only used data through 2009. If you look at more recent data, that effect completely disappears. And in fact, it looks like states that legalized medical marijuana had more opioid overdose deaths, not fewer. But even more important than that, I mean, I think your experience is really interesting and telling, because if you want to look at whether using a drug is going to help or hurt a person, you shouldn't look at state level data. You should look at individual data. And what the data clearly shows is that when you track people who start to use cannabis, if they're using it for chronic pain, there's actually a very good study out of Australia from this that tracked people for 4 years. And what it showed is that people who used cannabis for pain actually were using more opioids at the end of 4 years, not fewer. And then there's a study from the U.S. It's older data, but it's a pretty new study. It was published in 2018. And that paper shows that people who are using cannabis were 3 times as likely to be using opioids 3 years later. So cannabis use doesn't seem to be an off-ramp to opioid use. If anything, it seems to be an on-ramp. And I actually have a theory about this, which I've never really, I haven't seen it in the literature, but my theory is, look, if you drink, alcohol kind of dulls your sensations and heightens your emotions. We talk about happy drunks or angry drunks, and cannabis is kind of the opposite. It dulls your emotions, but it heightens your sensations. That's why people, they like to listen to music when they're high. They like to, eat big meals when they're high. But if you're in pain, maybe a drug that heightens your sensations isn't the best idea. And so you're absolutely correct. There's very, very little scientific evidence that cannabis is an effective painkiller.
Yeah, so really you've got to join the two up where you got to have the pain management effects still of the opiates, and then you've got to have the emotional dulling effects of the marijuana, which is maybe
Which is
why
not
you're
great.
putting the two together. Not great. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, how do you feel about so the NFL and in particular the players and the NFL Players Association are really talking about bringing marijuana into the NFL, and their claim is the pain management and it's to keep players off of the opioids. Personally, I think it's just for recreational use that the players are seeing it open it up in various states, and one guy on one team may be able to use it while another guy on another team, and broadly the National Football League would say you can't use it, but you're only tested once a year. And we as
Right.
players used to call it the IQ test. It was on literally it was on 420 every year from 420 up until August 8th, and if you didn't get tested that first time, you knew it was coming, but you only got tested the once, so really you only had to put it down for a month. But I just think it's just such a farce that the players are trying to have these claims for the pain management, the opiates, and I think it's a really slippery slope, and
I mean,
a lot for like public relations standpoints. I mean, there's so many kids that look up to these players, right or wrong, that if you open it up and you've got a player now being sponsored by a medical marijuana company and the kid looks up to that player, I mean, what's to stop the kid who doesn't know that, hey, maybe occasional use when you're in your 20s is not near as harmful as it is when you're 15 years old, and parents now have no line of defense for that.
yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely correct. And listen, I understand why players don't want to get tested for this. They want to be able to use sometimes, just like they want to be able to go out and have a drink or,
Right.
or a couple of drinks, right? I mean, you're a professional athlete. You want to be able to go out and have a good time. I get that. But, but to some extent, this mirrors the problem in our society with this, okay? I don't really believe that cannabis should be legalized, but if it's going to be legalized, let's let it be legalized for recreational use. Let's not pretend it's medicine, because that's the worst thing of all. Then you wind up with people who have psychiatric conditions like depression or anxiety telling themselves that they're medicating themselves, when in reality all they're doing is getting high with a drug that might make their conditions much worse. And so when you have these guys who are heroes to lots of people in our society, especially young people who are in great shape and they look like Superman, and they can do anything on a football field, saying, well, this is my medicine. I mean, it sends absolutely the wrong message to a 15-year-old kid.
Guys, we'll get back to the podcast in just a moment. But first, we have a little bit of breaking news. This important PSA is brought to you by manscaped.com. This is your pubic service announcement. Wait, is that public service and the pubic service announcement? After more than 18 months of research and development, the Manscaped engineering team has confirmed that they have successfully created the greatest ball hair trimmer that has ever existed. You men out there, you ladies out there looking for a gift for your men, maintenance is key. The new trimmer was just released only moments ago. We are the first to confirm the new and improved Lawnmower 3.0 manscaping trimmer is now available for purchase. Don't miss out on this. Get 20% off and free shipping with the code BELIEVE, BLEAV, at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com, and use the code BELIEVE, BLEAV. And as always, your balls will thank you. Okay, so here's another claim that really throws me off, because from past use, I can say without a doubt that it only increased the anxiety. People say it helps with their anxiety. What does the science tell us about that?
The science tells us, and this, I would say, this is not just true for cannabis. Okay, this is true for alcohol, and this is true for prescription anti-anxiety meds. Using drugs, psychoactive drugs, to treat anxiety is a really bad idea, because you can dull your anxiety for short periods of time. You can do that with benzos, benzodiazepines like Valium. You can do that with cannabis. You can do that with alcohol. But when I say short periods, I mean days to maybe a couple of weeks, because what will happen is you will get rebound anxiety when you try to stop, and it can be terrible. Rebound anxiety, meaning your anxiety will come back and it will be worse, because you have started to change your brain in ways that mean when you try to take the drug away, your brain is going to respond very negatively. And so, I mean, again, I don't think the idea that I'm using this to treat my anxiety it really makes a lot of sense. And anecdotally, by the way, even the people who sell cannabis will admit that it causes anxiety in a lot of people. That's why there's all this nonsense about, well, you should use indica and not sativa, or, use, literally, you can go on Twitter and find, take black pepper if you start to get anxious, hold an ice cube in your hands, all this basically just mumbo jumbo that has nothing to do with the realities of what the drug is doing to your brain, which is THC affects a system in your brain called the endocannabinoid system. There's receptors in the brain that respond to cannabis, and in doing so, they ultimately there's a chemical, a neurotransmitter called dopamine that's released. That's why you feel good. But there are other changes that can drive anxiety.
All right, so here's one that I'm hearing about now, and this to me kind of is right in alignment with anxiety. It helps combat veterans returning with PTSD. What can you tell us about that?
Again, it's really the same problem, and the problem is that's another sort of mild psychiatric condition. I mean, in some cases it can be quite severe. In many cases, it's severe but not disabling, or it's a little bit, it's mild to moderate. So again, if you get yourself high, you're going to feel better for a little while, whether you have PTSD, whether you have depression, whether you have anxiety, but you are doing nothing to help yourself with, the things in your life that may be causing those conditions, or the issues in your brain chemistry that might be causing those conditions. All you're doing is masking them. And when the mask goes away, you're going to feel worse.
So some of the real dangers of marijuana, you pointed these out in the book. They're categorized as psychosis. Will you define what you were talking about when you were describing psychosis?
Yes. So psychosis, now that's a really severe condition. So psychosis is it's the term that psychiatrists use when somebody has had a break from reality. So that could be hallucinations, it could be delusions, it could be paranoia, it could be just your thoughts are completely jumbled and disordered. It could be, honestly, when it's really severe, you can actually become catatonic. That's very, very rare, but that's it. When you really break your brain, bad things can happen to your mind, right? And so psychosis is something that actually isn't as rare as we think in society, mostly because people who have a psychotic episode don't tend to talk about it, which is understandable. And so psychosis, the best estimates are that about one person in 25 will have some kind of psychotic disorder over the course of his or her life. So that could be schizophrenia, that could be bipolar disorder with psychosis, it could be depression with psychosis. So 1 in 25, I think that's a lot of people. Some people might say, well, it's only 1 in 25. To me, it sounds like a lot. It's more than 10 million Americans. So here's what we know. We know that, and by the way, psychosis can be temporary or it can be permanent. If it's permanent, if you're sort of one of these very unfortunate people who develops a permanent psychotic condition, you usually are going to get a diagnosis of schizophrenia. And what that means is that you have these symptoms and they don't go away, not just for a week or a month, but really for several months or even a year or more. And in that case, you're often going to get drugs that will help treat the symptoms of your psychosis. But the drugs don't really work as well as we would like. They were invented about 50 or 60 years ago. There was a new generation of them introduced in the 1990s, but they really just kind of hammer the brain, and they have pretty severe side effects, and a lot of people with psychosis don't like to take them. So if you wind up with a diagnosis of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder with psychosis, these are pretty severe conditions, and most people don't do that well in the long run once they get one of these diagnoses. So we really want to avoid that. And here's what we know about cannabis, okay? And this is really important because I don't like to go. I like to tell people exactly what the science says. I don't want to go past it. I don't want to, be accused of scaremongering or anything like that. One, cannabis can cause transient psychotic episodes. Nobody would dispute that. Okay, people wind up in the emergency room with some kind of psychotic episode driven by cannabis all the time, every day in California, every day all over the country. Okay. Two, if you have some kind of permanent psychotic condition like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder with psychosis, and you use cannabis, you are likely to have really severe psychotic episodes as a result. Okay, I don't think any psychiatrist would dispute that. 3, if you were going to develop schizophrenia anyway, and this is something most people develop between about 17 and 25, 26, it tends to accelerate the development of that. And that's really bad because the younger you are when you get your diagnosis, the worse your outcome. Now, there's a big question around whether or not cannabis use all by itself can cause somebody to become schizophrenic who wouldn't otherwise have been schizophrenic. I think the evidence, and this is what I write about in Tell Your Children, is quite strong. That basically this looks to me like if you start using in your teens and you use pretty heavily, you have a 2 to 5 times risk of developing schizophrenia as opposed to not using it all. But there are good psychiatrists out there who don't think this case has been proven yet. And so I don't want to say that everybody agrees with me about this. But here's what I would also say. Even if it's not true, even if I'm totally wrong and the book's totally wrong, which I think in a few more years, the weight of the evidence will continue to pile up. Even if I'm totally wrong about this, nobody would dispute all these other negative effects that using cannabis can cause. And so why wouldn't we tell people not to use it?
Yeah, so that would be what the naysayers are talking about, is they would say that marijuana use is correlated to psychosis, not caused by marijuana.
That's right. That somebody who developed schizophrenia and used a lot of cannabis would have developed it anyway. Now, maybe they would have developed it a little bit later. Maybe it wouldn't have been quite as severe, but they would have developed it anyway. That's what they would say.
Yeah, from reading your book, I found it very compelling, and the amount and the labor that went into mining this data was absolutely staggering. So the phrase marijuana addiction popped up multiple times. That would be the
Sure.
one thing that a lot of proponents for the plan, I guess, would lean on, is that it's non-addictive. And this is a term used in some of the data points that even hospitals used to define that patient coming into the system. It wasn't your own term. When they say marijuana addiction, are they talking behavioral addiction or an actual chemical addiction?
So that's a great question. The reason marijuana proponents say it's not addictive is that if you quit, you're not going to have the kind of withdrawal symptoms that you have from opioids, right? Or alcohol. If you're a heavy drinker and you try to go cold turkey, you can die. I mean, you can literally put your body basically into shock and die. And, opioids, the withdrawal syndrome is real. Cannabis, it isn't like you're going to have leg twitches and you're going to have to, lock yourself to the radiator because you're going to be shaking so badly, or, any of the stuff that we, the sort of stereotypes of the person going cold turkey from opioids. But that does not mean it's not addictive. A, it's behaviorally addictive. And B, there is a pretty clear set of withdrawal symptoms that come mainly around insomnia, anxiety. You get all this rebound stuff that I was talking about earlier. And here's my question, okay? And I will admit this is not how psychiatrists define addiction. But to me, addiction is defined in one simple way. Are you using this drug in a way that is problematic for you? That, in other words, it's hurting your family life, it's hurting your work life. Maybe you were arrested for it. You've had some kind of problem, real problem with using, and you have tried to stop, or you haven't tried to stop because you won't try to stop, but your use has continued despite these real problems. And to me, that's the definition. It's a simple layman's definition of addiction.
And that seems super reasonable. That's a super reasonable addiction. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It seems that way to me. And when you define it that way, it's 100% clear that cannabis causes that for lots and lots of users.
Yes. And I thought it was really interesting towards the end of the book, you stated legalizing marijuana doesn't really end the black market for marijuana. I didn't even think about this when kind of these bills were coming through California. My eyes were open to it about a month ago. I was talking to a guy in his young 20s who's like, dude, marijuana is way cheaper outside of the stores than it is in the stores.
That's right.
So I guess what probably the overall thought from a lot of folks was that the black market's going to go away and then the drug war will end. Has any of that happened?
No, none of that has happened. And I would say the only thing you can say on the pro case is, okay, it's only been a few years, in places like Colorado, and so we don't really know. It may take a few years, but and we haven't even talked about cannabis and violence, and the violence thing is even more controversial than the mental illness part of this. So in some ways, I don't like talking about it because I think it can distract from these very, very serious issues around mental illness. But here's one really important point that I would like to make about this. When cannabis was legalized in places like Colorado, and to a lesser extent California, but in Colorado and Washington, these first states to legalize, the proponents said this is going to be great for the cops. The cops aren't going to have to worry about arresting people for cannabis. They're going to be able to chase down the murderers and the robbers and the rapists. And you know what? Crime is going to go down just because of that. And it's going to go down because there won't be an illicit market anymore. Well, guess what? We now have about 5 years of data in Colorado and Washington and Oregon, and and Alaska, by the way, too. In all those states, violent crime is up significantly. In Colorado, in Denver, since 2013, the number of homicides has almost doubled. You can say, okay, Denver's only one city, but if you look sort of statewide and you combine the states, you see the same trends. Violent crime, by which I mean murders and aggravated assaults, are up much faster in those 4 states than nationally since 2013. And I'm not saying that we can prove at this point that cannabis legalization caused this. I think there's some evidence that it has, but I'm not saying we can prove it. But here's what I am saying. The people who were pro-legalization said exactly what you said. There's going to be no more, off-market sales. Crime is going to go down. Well, what's happened, guys? And why has it happened?
What about the financial overall ramifications of legalization? And people on the pro side would say, well, tax revenue has increased. People have jobs and there's more corporations paying more taxes. And
Sure,
so we could have better schools. I mean, is there anything to that? Or long term, when you're talking about some of the numbers that I saw in the book from people that were checking themselves into ER
Sure.
or these psychotic episodes and some of the long-term anxiety effects that may keep people out of work. I mean, overall, is there going to be a positive financial ramification, or do you think in the long haul we're going to go, well, this was very short-sighted?
I think financially it'll be negative. I don't think this is how we should look at issues of public health, by the way, because you can argue that making cigarettes less common actually hurt our finances because people, instead of dying at 65, live to 85 and they collected Social Security. I'm not joking. Like, if you do the math, you can actually get there. So I don't think that that's a good way to look at it. That said, it seems pretty clear that that cannabis legalization is a nothing in terms of state budgets. I believe the state of California, I believe, is about a $300 billion state budget annually. It might be bigger than that. I'd have to double check. And I think cannabis taxes this year are about $350 million. So that's 1 penny out of $10. And by the way, that doesn't count the cost of administering the programs, right? Because there's the Bureau of Cannabis Control. There's all this expensive regulation. This is a minor industry in terms of its economic impact, but it's a major industry in terms of its public health impact.
Do you think if it hasn't happened already, we're going to see a point in this whole legalization, a sense of regret, like maybe opening up a box that we didn't really know what was inside?
I don't know. I think, I think that right now legalization still has a lot of momentum. I think that there's been a very sophisticated propaganda campaign that's gone on for, close to 20 years. And I think the media has not done its job. I mean, one of the things that I say is that when I was an investigative reporter at the New York Times, and this is a joke, but it's true, the old line was, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. In other words, don't ever trust what the company is telling you. And we've lived through, in the last 50 years, we've lived through learning that the tobacco companies just lied to us about the health effects of cigarettes. Now we're in the middle of this terrible opioid epidemic, and we found out that Purdue Pharma and other, opioid makers lied about that. And so all these great reporters who've done all this good work, when it comes to cannabis, it's like they just lose their minds. And I really don't know why. And so if you look at the at the support for legalization, it's still quite strong. So I'm not sure what's going to turn that around or how quickly it will turn around. I will say this: if you look at the late 70s, there was a pretty strong move to decriminalize cannabis then. It wasn't as strong as it is now, but it was pretty strong. And it basically turned around overnight because a bunch of parents woke up and they saw their kids and they're like, what is this drug doing to my kids? And I think that could happen again. And the history of a sort of drug crises in the U.S. suggests that once there's a tipping point, action can happen pretty fast. But I'm not going to say that that's happening right now because it's not. I'm just saying it could happen.
For parents out there listening, what do you want them to know? What kind of information should they be relaying to their kids?
3 or 4 key things. One, this is not a good substitute for alcohol. By the way, I'm not encouraging any 16-year-old to drink. I'm just saying if your kid comes to you and says, hey, this is way safer than alcohol, I can use it, and I'm not going to drink and drive, and it's just so much better for me, that is BS. Okay. It is certainly more neurotoxic than alcohol. It's less physically dangerous, but it's more neurotoxic. 2, and related to this, don't think that driving while you're high or getting in a car with somebody who's high is safe. Unfortunately, the real world evidence, again, from Colorado, from Washington, even from California, suggests that although some people drive carefully when they're stoned, some people get somewhat paranoid and agitated and speed incredibly fast. And actually, I can point you to a surprising number of cases where people got in fatal accidents and they were driving more than 100 miles an hour, and the only drug in their system was cannabis.
Wow.
Which actually, yeah, I mean, it's not what you would expect. I think there's sort of a bigger point here about the way we think about drugs. We all think, oh, cannabis, you just sit around on your couch, you don't do anything. Alcohol makes people fight. But I think for people who know drug users, and I mean, I think most people know drug users,
Yes.
you're going to know some people who are drinkers who just sit around and do nothing, and some people get agitated. And with cannabis, I'll bet when people actually think about people they know or their own experiences with the drug, they'll recall times when it had a really negative effect on them, when it made them paranoid, when it made them agitated. But this idea that it always calms you down is just not true. So I think once people actually think about it that way, rather than just listening to the propaganda of the cannabis lobby, it helps them kind of reset their expectations. But anyway, to go back to the parents. So 1, this is not a safe substitute for alcohol. 2, please don't get in the car and drive. And 3, look, most parents, or certainly, in a place like California, a place like New York, they're going to have used cannabis at some point in their, college life or their high school life or in their early 20s for whatever reason. Know that the drug that your kids are using is very different than the cannabis that you used. It's much higher in THC. In some cases, it's pure THC. That's what vaping THC is. It's basically pure THC. And that's going to have much stronger psychiatric effects. And so don't trust the cannabis lobby when they say this is basically safe for young adults or teens. And tell your kids, hey, look, I understand you want to try this. I understand there's pressure out there. Please don't use until you're in your 20s if you must use. Give your brain a chance to get settled.
Go back, if you don't mind, and touch on that neurotoxicity point when you were talking about it's much more neurotoxic than alcohol is.
Sure. So alcohol can, destroy your liver. People do die from alcohol overdoses. Nobody would dispute that. But alcohol doesn't tend to produce psychotic episodes in people. Yes, again, can you have depression when you're drinking too much? Absolutely, just as you can with cannabis. What alcohol doesn't seem to do is make people psychotic. Now, I want to point out again, there are exceptions to that, especially for heavy drinkers in late stage alcoholism.
Right.
But with cannabis, it seems like even if you're psychiatrically healthy, you can wind up temporarily psychotic after using. And if you have this propensity for severe mental illness, it can make that worse. And it's funny, you mentioned in the book, one of the things that is most interesting to me is that basically in every community where cannabis has been heavily used, whether that was Egypt, whether it's India, whether it's Mexico in the late 1800s, people have noticed this. It's like, it's not that hard to see. People become mentally ill, some fraction of them after using, and that gets noticed. It's only in the United States in the last 30 years that we've pretended this isn't true.
So there's no neuroprotective qualities like some of the football people are trying to claim,
Oh
because
God,
I'll put the
no.
that's hilarious. I'll put it out on social media. I'm like, put down the marijuana if you want any type of brain health, and people are like, I think you should look up the facts, man. It's actually neuroprotective, and I'm like, I
It's
just
such a.
can't.
It's. I mean, honestly, I think that some of the CTE stuff is exacerbated by cannabis use. I'm
Yes.
not saying CTE is not a serious problem, but using cannabis to fight CTE is like using gasoline to fight a fire. It is a terrible idea.
Absolutely. Alex, thank you. This was absolutely fantastic. What's next for you?
Uh, well, I have a novel coming out. It's not a Wells novel at the end of this year, but I'm thinking about writing sort of a bigger book about the war on drugs and drugs in general.
Alex, fantastic information. We greatly appreciate your time. Keep up the good work. I know you've taken quite a cross to bear here, but we wish you the best of luck, and keep it up, really. I mean, because people do need to hear this message that you have. And get the book out there, parents. And if there's any young kids out there listening, please get the book, know the information. And like my neuroscientist friend up at Stanford, Andrew Huberman, said, marijuana has never made anybody smarter.